Um, yeah, welcome everyone, and thank you very much for logging in. As Debbie said, my name is David Cooper, and I'm based in the Department of English at Manchester Metropolitan University, where I co-direct something called the Centre for Place Writing, which is a relatively new research centre which is dedicated, as the name suggests, to the relationship between writing and place, with a particular focus, a particular interest in the imaginative landscapes of the north of England. And as you might can just tell from the sounds outside, I'm speaking to you from the Portico Library at the moment. So with the authentic sounds of the trams of central Manchester. And over the past few years, it's been sort of an enormous pleasure for the Centre for Place Writing to partner with the Portico Library on the activities surrounding the Portico Prize. And as many of you will know, the Portico Prize is a major literary award which is given for the writing that best encapsulates the spirit of the north of England. And the 2022 prize was awarded earlier on this year to Sally J. Morgan for Toto Among the Murderers, which you haven't read it, it's an amazing novel, which is sort of in which Sally draws upon her experiences of living in Leeds in the 1970s. And in and around the sort of awarding the prize, we've worked with the Portico on a programme of events which we've entitled Rewriting the North. And for these events and these sort of projects, we're very grateful to the Arts Council, to Arts Council England for their generous support. And again, as many of you will know, Rewriting the North has involved a series of podcasts. And if you haven't listened to those podcasts, please do. They're available online. There's a series of podcasts in which writers working in different forms talk about their literary landscapes, and Adam, who's speaking tonight, was one of the contributors to that series. So please do check out those podcasts. But we've also organised a series of author events, both here in the library in Manchester, but also online as well. And for the latest author event, which we've got tonight, we're absolutely delighted to partner with New Writing North. So with that, I'm going to hand over to Will Mackie, Senior Programme Manager for New Writing North, who's going to introduce this evening's speakers and explain a bit more about the format of events. And thanks once again, everyone, for logging in.
Oh, great, thank you. Thanks so much for that, David. Good evening, everybody. And I just wanted to say a big thank you to everybody for joining us tonight and spending the next hour with us. And also many thanks to the Portico Library for the invitation to be part of the Rewriting the North series. It's really good to be here. I'm just going to do a really quick introduction before we begin to talk to Adam and Catherine. I'm so pleased to be joined by two real genuine artists in creative nonfiction and memoir tonight, in Catherine Simpson and Adam Farrar. I'm really looking forward to talking about their latest books and their work in general. Just to quickly introduce the both of them. Catherine's a novelist, a journalist, a short story writer, a memoir writer. Her debut novel was published by Sandstone Press in 2015. That was Truestory. And her acclaimed memoir, When I Had a Little Sister, was published by Fourth Estate in 2019. She was also a Scottish Book Trust New Writers Awardee in 2013. Her new memoir, One Body, was published by Saraband earlier this year. Good to see Catherine. And Adam Farrar is a writer and editor who's based in Manchester. He edits the creative nonfiction journal, The Real Story, and programs literary events and workshops. Adam's first book, the memoir Cold Fish Soup, which is the book that we're going to be hearing a little bit from tonight, was the winner of the 2021 NorthBound Book Award. This prize is run in partnership by the University of York, Saraband, and New Writing North, and celebrates really the richness of Northern writing and seeks to spotlight our thriving independent publishing scene. Which brings me on just quickly to mention that both One Body and Cold Fish Soup are published by the award-winning publisher Saraband, who are one of our leading independent publishers based here in the north of England. They have an extraordinary list of fiction, nature writing, and memoir, which I'd really recommend everybody having a look at and checking out their books. They publish writers such as J.A. Mensah, Graham McRae Burnett, and Polly Atkin, all sort of really brilliant writers. It's a huge amount to love on their list of books. And just from the point of view of New Writing North, we're really proud to partner with Saraband and the University of York on the NorthBound Award. So yeah, the pattern for the next hour is that I'll ask a few questions. We'll have a couple of readings each from Adam and Catherine. I've slotted in some time for audience questions, but please, if you want to ask any as we go, then please post them in the Q&A, and I'll try to get onto them, as and when we can. But yeah, I'm gonna, begin now just by asking a couple of general questions, I guess, about this sort of what we call life writing, creative nonfiction, memoir, this type of writing that is based around nonfiction, but has a sort of stylistic, artistic commonality with fiction, I guess. So the first question I was going to ask you is quite general, but I wanted to ask, how did your books emerge as books of memoir rather than, for example, as fiction? And if you see, I guess, that this was the most appropriate form for this form of writing. When I think, I guess, of fiction, a lot of fiction is also life writing. It's writing from life, and poetry as well. And so I was just going to start you off with that, and I thought I'd ask you to go one at a time, but maybe Catherine first. I think you're muted in a minute. You try again?
Can you hear me now?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah, great. Yeah, well, somebody said to me the other day, I don't really understand what memoir is. I know what fiction is, but I don't know what memoir is. Where does it fit? And I said, well, as far as I'm concerned, memoir is very similar to fiction in that it tells a story, it has characters, it has scenes, it has little bits of dialogue. It hopefully immerses the reader, gets them turning the pages. But the big difference is that it's based on truth, the author's truth. And as far as I'm concerned, that if I call something a memoir, the contract I have with the reader is that it is as true as I can make it. Obviously, not everything is true can go in because it's only one book, but I only put things in a memoir if I believe them to be true. So I've written, as you said, 3 books. The first one was a novel, and that was inspired by my raising my daughter who's autistic. But at that time, with it being my first book and my daughter was only 14, it never even occurred to me to write a memoir about that, because I would have felt too vulnerable, too exposed. I would have felt I was exposing my daughter. But I really wanted to write about the subject of raising an autistic child. So I wrote it as fiction, and I changed the autistic child from a girl to a boy as some kind of distancing mechanism, which I now regret, because there are more things written about autistic boys than autistic girls. And I feel that it would have been useful actually to write a book about an autistic girl. However, that decision was made as a distancing measure. But I always acknowledged that it was that the book was inspired by my own experiences. And in fact, me and my daughter used Truestory, that particular book, as a means of raising awareness and acceptance of autism. But it wasn't the right time to write a memoir. And as I say, I wouldn't have had the confidence to write a memoir then anyway. Then my sister died by suicide. And it was you, Will, actually, who said to me, one day you'll write about this. And I said, no, there's no way I can write about this. It's too big. I wouldn't know how to start. I wouldn't know how to go about it. But then 1 or 2 years passed, and it suddenly felt like the right time to start thinking about that event in our lives. And it never, ever, I never thought for a moment that I was going to write a novel. It had to be a memoir, because what I wanted to find out, or I wanted to investigate, was how had this happened to my sister? How had this happened in our family? And so I wanted to investigate my family, my experience, and to dig really deep into what happened to us. So I think really I was writing it for me.
Yeah.
And it was only after I'd finished writing it that I thought, actually, this could be useful to other people. And so it turned out, because I can tell by the response that I got from other people.
Yeah.
And the same with One Body, that you know, I had cancer. I found out I got cancer, and I looked for the book to read. And I didn't want a textbook. I didn't want a how to have cancer book. I didn't want a funny book. I just wanted somebody to tell me straight up what it was like to go through the treatment and diagnosis of cancer. I couldn't find the book, so I decided to write it. And again, as I was writing it, and it was a form of sort of, making sense of what the heck was happening to me, I then began to realize that all kinds of other things were coming up, like, what it's like living in a female body. And so when I'd finished writing that and gone through the whole experience and come out of the other side, hopefully, I realized again, this could be useful to other people.
Yeah.
So again, that was never going to be a novel either. They were both my last two books were always going to be memoirs.
Yeah, and I guess that's defined by what you want to approach in those books, I guess, isn't it? And that sense of there being that duty to the truth, I suppose, as well. Duty
to the truth, and just it's this desire to dig really deep into something that I'm going through, to the point where you're describing exactly how your guts feel, like, this physicality of terror and grief, which, I mean, you can do that in fiction, but I just wanted to really understand what I was going through, what I had been through, what my family had been through. And it felt the truest way to do it was just to be as honest as I could.
Yeah, okay. I was going to bring Adam in there as well now. So, because is that how you feel as well, Adam? And from reading your book, Cold Fish Soup, which I should say is kind of structured as self-contained essays, but that all work together as a whole as well. Do you feel reading that there's a lot of figuring out that's going on through that book as well?
Yeah, there's a lot of self-exploration that happened during the writing of it. I mean, my initial intention was to write a book of essays about this fascinating area of the Yorkshire coast and the people who live in it and my family and what the region did to my family and how they interacted with it. And it sort of slowly through the writing of it became this self-exploration, and it became much more about me than I ever expected it to be, because it seemed like quite a conceit to write a memoir, to be honest, because I'm not even the most famous person in my family, and I'd written a book about my life, but I worked with a mentor on this one, Jen Ashworth, and I would send her new bits of writing every month, like working through these essays. And every time there was something that was a bit sort of difficult and a bit like deeply personal and problematic, she'd go, just try digging into that bit, like get into that bit. And those were even though they were the challenging sort of exposing parts of the book and make you quite vulnerable, I think that's where all the best stuff is, and that's the sort of stronger writing is in those difficult parts. And now the book is out in the world, it's those parts that are connecting with readers, so you feel that sort of it feels like magic, really. Like you write this book, you send it out into the world, and people they can see themselves in some of the stuff that you're talking about, and their lives reflecting back at it, your life reflecting back at them. And it's there's something about nonfiction, memoir and life writing in particular, that connects on a fundamental level. And that's not to denigrate fiction at all, but it feels like it has a different power than fiction. And I don't foresee myself writing a full-length fiction book, having written this, because it feels everything I want from writing is in life writing. I think I can't see myself throwing myself into anything else. I'd tried fiction before, tried to write a crime novel, spent about a decade trying to write a crime novel, and none of it rang true. And I didn't find my actual voice until I threw myself into very exposing, frequently embarrassing nonfiction.
And it feels like an exciting time for nonfiction, doesn't it, in general, in that there are these books that are so artistically created in the form, I think, that are doing so many interesting things. And does it quite excite you that there is that sense of it being an innovative and versatile form to write? And I mean, both of your books are stylistically very interesting, I think. Adam, with your essays that all link together and this wider arc, and then Catherine, your book it's kind of non-linear, but it's linked together by sort of continuing themes, continuing narratives that again come together as this, as it's subtitled as this retrospective of your whole body.
Yeah, I was writing about having cancer and the experience of that, and then all these other themes began to come up. And it was in a discussion with my publisher, Sarah Hunt of Saraband, who suggested that we did alternate chapters, one about the current situation of me undergoing treatment, and then another chapter about some other subject like puberty or pregnancy or breastfeeding or all kinds of different things that I've gone through because I'm a woman in this particular body. And so, yeah, it's sort of done in alternate chapters. And I think that really resonates with people, because although not everybody's had cancer, although 1 in 2 of us will get cancer at some time, almost everybody has either experienced the other things that I'm talking about or know somebody who has. Somebody sent me a message the other day saying, I gave this to my mother and she was floored by it. Because there are so many things that we just took for granted in the 60s, 70s, 80s about what it was like to be a woman. And then when you see them written down, you just go, oh my, I cannot believe that we thought that was normal. So yeah, it was a very, very satisfying, it was a very, very satisfying experience to write this book, to get my own thoughts clear in exactly what I've been through in my life and what probably every other woman has been through too.
Yeah, I think there's an incredible resonance, I think, in reading about some, I think a lot of memoir writers probably have that thing that Adam was saying before about, I'm not famous, who is going to read this, but I think there's a huge amount of resonance in actually reading about someone whose experiences in life are not a million miles away from your own, and are relatable, and you've been through shared times, or that you've been through things that other people might be facing at this time or going to go through at some point.
Definitely, people have got in touch and said, you've told my story, or I've never seen my story told before in that way, or I've lived through that, or my parents did that, and I just think that makes me feel so great that I've helped somebody else articulate their experience or understand their experience, and that just makes everything worth it.
Yeah, I found the same thing. The people have got in touch to talk about the mental health aspects that are in here, the family dynamics are things that resonate with them, and I think having, particularly mine, because it's like place located, people want to read about their region being written about, like, because the place that I wrote about, tumbling into the sea and no one really cares that it's happening, and the people who live there who bought this book is like, they recognize their place, and it's like, even though this town is disappearing and it's kind of struggling, that someone cared enough to write about where they live means something as well. And that connection with people contacting you and like going through the details in your book that resonate with them, I think that's it's wonderful. I don't know why anyone would want to write anything else having had that experience.
It's a great reward, isn't it? Yeah, and that sense of writing about somewhere that isn't often written about is in this particular format is really important as well. So we're going to hear a first of our readings, I think, from Catherine, and I think you're going to read a bit from One Body, right?
I am. I've got it on my phone here because I'm actually abroad at the moment without a copy of my book. But so I'm going to just read the first couple of pages of One Body, which is the memoir about cancer and having a woman's body. I chose this because I thought it was quite northern, in that it's set on I was born on a northern dairy farm. And although it may be northern in the way that I read it as much as anything else, because I have a certain deadpan delivery, so I think that that's quite northern as well. But I also chose this bit to show, it's a heavy topic, but I want people to pick up the book, open it and think, okay, we're dealing with a serious subject here, but there's a light touch. It's not going to depress the hell out of me. So I'll just read the first couple of pages of One Body. I was born at milking time on a dairy farm, which must have been a nuisance. I would learn later that nothing got in the way of milking, and it was never acceptable to be a nuisance. Nurse Steele attended my mother, who was in bed in the best sitting room, and afterwards the doctor picked his way across the dark farmyard, through the puddles and over the cobbles to the cowshed to inform my dad. Another girl. It was late October back in '63, and as Frankie Valli might have said, oh, what a night. Being farmers, they must have wanted a boy. But seeing as I weighed a decent 8 pounds and had 10 fingers and 10 toes, they got what they were given. My mother could not breastfeed, and I refused bottled milk, another nuisance on a dairy farm. So legend has it, she fed me liquid ice sandwiches. At 3 months before any of my vaccinations, I got whooping cough, and she sat up night after night with me in front of the kitchen range, waiting for the whoop between the coughs, thinking I'd drawn my last breath. Over the years, I was told every now and again, you nearly died, you did, think on. My mother also told me she'd fallen downstairs when she was pregnant with me and remarked more than once, I didn't make such a good job of you. One way or another, I used up a lot of my mother's patience before I was even old enough to remember. I was not raised with permission to be ill. As I grew up, illness was barely tolerated. Doctors' surgeries were for inoculations. Hospitals were for dealing with accidents with the occasional stitch or a plaster cast. For years, our farmhouse did not contain a first aid kit, and the only medication we had was a bottle of orange-flavoured junior aspirin on the top shelf in the kitchen to shut us up if we felt poorly, and a tin of sticky pink Germaline for cuts and grazes. One of my most prized possessions was a nurse's bag I got for my 8th birthday, which contained a pretend syringe and a hammer for knocking knees. But I knew no one who worked in the medical profession. I was more familiar with the veterinary surgeon. We often watched the vet at work on the farm, injecting animals and carving cows. We also watched the artificial inseminator, the AI, at work in his enormous rubber apron, taking a straw of bull semen and sticking his arm up to his armpit inside a cow. This was mysterious, but also normal. So normal that when we played in the muddy banks of the pond, we shoved our hands in deep, brought them out with a plop and shouted, I'm the AI. At our village primary school, Mrs. Darlington had magic cream, a cream that took away all pain, stopped all aches and cured all illness. I imagine it was Savlon, but for years I believed it said magic cream on the tube. I longed for magic cream, but I never got any because I never had any ailments. When one of the boys broke his leg tripping over a slab in the playground, magic cream was not applied. Instead, he was put at the front of the classroom with his leg propped on a chair and a wet paper towel on top until home time. Children who were ill were exotic. Illness made them worthy of fuss, a chair at the front, a wet paper towel. Illness made them special.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for that, Catherine. Both of you, I mean, there are, I've been reading your books again this week, just, I'm reading them together, kind of alternating. And there are a lot of things, I guess, that are slightly in common in your books. You both write a lot about family. You both write about incredibly well about childhood and about, being a teenager. And you both deal also with, sensitive and traumatic themes in your writing, your own trauma, but other people's as well. There are moments when it's kind of stark and direct, but there are also many, many moments when you use humor in your writing as well, as as we've just seen with Catherine. And what is it about humor? How does that work for you when you're your writing? Is what are the advantages of using it to deal with these difficult topics? Adam, do you want to go first?
Yeah, and I found that I mean, I've got some of the main topics. The core topic in this book is suicidal ideation and the suicide of my brother, and they're quite dark, difficult things to approach. But I found humor sort of softened the edges and made them sort of more approachable subjects. There's certainly subjects that people don't seem to be too keen to engage with, and I found that I could make it bearable for someone to read about some really awful stuff by making the odd joke, but trying to do it in a way that there was a balance, that it wasn't undermining the seriousness of the subject matter, because I didn't want to make wisecracks about like the darkest points of someone's life. But yeah, to me, it really it sweetened the medicine really, and made it somehow more palatable. But my writing has always done that. I think my goal was to try and do something that was a bit like stand-up comedy, but without any of the risk of getting up and exposing yourself and standing there with a mic and hoping for the best. But if you're behind like the shield of a book, you can write about funny things, and you can connect with people through humor in the way that a stand-up would. Often if you go and see at the show at Edinburgh, there's some really dark stuff being presented to you, but you also get that comedy that's like, is a little bit of a lift and a little bit of a relief, and allows you to accept the darker stuff. And that was always my focus through this entire book.
Yeah, Catherine, does that resonate with you a little?
Yeah, definitely. I think I always try to, I'm trying to get that line between pathos and tragedy, because life's both. And life can be both on the same day. So I wouldn't say I ever tell a joke as such ever in my writing, but I will state an absurdity, but I'll just say it. I won't say this was absurd. I'll just state something that happened or something that was said. Let the reader make their own mind up about it, and then immediately juxtapose it with something that's the opposite. And I think that makes both sides stronger.
Yeah, I think that's true. I mean, there were bits in your book. The bit that really sticks in my head was you being furious that you had to buy a dressing gown to go and have cancer treatment. It's like, I'm not buying a dressing gown for cancer. That sort of outrage. That's like, you weren't making a crack, but it was a really funny thing to put forward, like this outrage. And that's where the humor really came forward like that. It really is.
And there are these absurdities all the time, and it's just I'm trying to get that, as you do, Adam. That just tiptoeing down that line between the two, sadness and humor, and it makes both sides stronger. And I think that because people say to me when I say, "Oh, what have you written?" I'll say, "Well, I've written a memoir about cancer. I've written a memoir about the death by suicide of my sister." And they go, "Ooh, that sounds grim." And I'll say, well, actually, the books aren't grim at all, because they're about life, and life is full of joy as well as tragedy. And I'm hoping that, and ultimately, life does go on so they are actually, I would say, quite joyful books, my books. I don't know, maybe that's me being unrealistic.
No, I totally got that. That's really something I felt, and it made me.
Same with yours.
It made me feel like I know we've met in passing, but I really felt I knew you after reading those books, and I think that's another aspect of writing very sort of exposing memoir. You make such a connection with people that are like, yeah, I know this person.
It's really interesting, when it's done well, you get a sense of someone's their personality really very clearly in those. We're going to hear a reading from Adam now, and I noticed we have few questions in the chat as well, so I'll come to those after Adam's done his reading.
Okay, so this is from the first essay in the book, where I've come home to see my family at Christmas, and in a very bad place sort of mentally, and not wanting to be around in the world, but I have to put on a bit of a show for my family and let them feel like everything's okay. And we're going out for a Christmas meal in the golf club in my parents' house. And yeah, I shall start halfway through that. So, my mother is a passionate performer, always looking for an excuse to apply grease paint and parade about in front of an audience. She's in her 70s now, but still performs in a dance troupe, as a member of the local choir, and as part of a pirate singing group, in which she travels the country, roaring shanties in coastal towns while dressed like a drunken sailor. She wanted us children to share her enthusiasm for the spotlight, and it was clear that part of her looked at my siblings and I and saw potential for her own merry little band of Von Trapps. Being the eldest, Becky, my sister, was the first to find herself being crammed into a sweat-inducing polyester outfit and shoved into a chorus line. Whether she was a blackbird baked in a pie or the fart-addled rear end of a pantomime horse, she suffered it with the stoicism of a regularly humiliated prisoner of war. Robert, my brother, was bolder and more cocksure, willingly taking the lead in Oliver at the age of 10, his voice pure and bell-like as he performed a saintly rendition of Where Is Love, giving no indication that, by that age, he'd already started smoking and carrying a flick knife in his back pocket. But it was Becky's plight that interested me the most, because it came with costumes. I was particularly drawn to the flying monkey outfit that she wore in an amateur production of The Wizard of Oz. Unlike in the movie, it was entirely brown and topped off, for reasons known only to our mother, with a glitter-specked afro wig. I loved it so much that I insisted she let me try it on, tights and all, so I could pose for a photo. And the image still exists somewhere, of me standing in our living room, cock-hipped and sassy as a tomcat, so effervescent with showbiz pep, you'd think I'd just pirouetted out of a successful audition for Starlight Express. But this kind of display meant nothing. You may have seen me happily strutting around our house dressed like Carmen Miranda, but threaten me with a stage and I've seen people box up feral cats with less fuss. I was deeply afraid of public humiliation and failure, an anxiety fueled by the acute self-knowledge that I was exactly the kind of kid who might somehow wander out in front of an audience with his dick poking out of his fly. So the fact that I behaved one way at home and another outside of it, dogged in my resistance to the stage, was perceived by my mother as a considered act of screwing with her. "Come on," she would insist through gritted teeth, nudging me toward the stage during rehearsals in the town hall. "It'll be fun." But I knew what fun was, and it didn't involve a room full of people booing at my adolescent penis. So I'd hold my ground until she gave up. What I didn't reckon with was that I was absorbing the need to perform by osmosis, that over the years I would feel drawn to stages, first in bands, strapping on guitars and stepping out in front of audiences to sing amongst waves of protective distortion and clattering noise, then eventually alone to read stories and talk. And now it seems to stand before my mother and put on a show in a golf club. Because growing up in our house was a lot like being the lone non-smoker in a room. You can abstain all you want, but given time, you'll still end up smelling like an ashtray. And if you spend enough time around my mother, then, one way or another, you'll somehow find yourself in stage tights. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for that, Adam. There is all through the book, there's that kind of recurring theme of wanting to perform, of wanting attention. And there's the essay about the time when you would jump into bodies of water, when you were like in your early teens, I think, and it's something that I think you've it's almost like through the course of it, you've kind of traced that a little bit, that whole urgency, haven't you?
Yeah, it was something. It was naturally reoccurring through each of the essays, because I wanted to have every essay to have a very sort of defined personality and story behind it. But there was this reoccurring theme of just a kind of terrible look at me instinct that I think came from my mum, and I was sort of picking up that because my mum is as I get into the book, my mum is like a burlesque dancer. She still is a burlesque dancer at 72. She's still going out and, you know, regularly dancing and doing these gigs in clubs all over Yorkshire. And I used to be sort of profoundly embarrassed by that, I thought. But right in the writing of this book, I think I learned how much I admired her and how much I wanted to be like her, and how much I was trying over the years without realizing it. So I think this is, yeah, it's really writing so intensely about myself, but my own relationship with my family has really added a new layer of appreciation for them. Like you can sometimes take your family for granted, and then when you're forced to put them under a magnifying glass, you're like, they're so fundamental to me in a way that I didn't fully take on board. And again, it's like another bit of magic in this type of writing.
I mean, you both write, you know, wonderfully about family, and Adam, you know, your mum's obviously a real kind of star in your book, and for Catherine as well, your partner, and you write about your daughters. And is there a real challenge in that, I suppose, when it's people you know so incredibly well that you're writing about, and you want to, you know, you want to do justice to who they are on the page? Is it hard, or does it come naturally because you know them so well?
Shall I answer that?
Yeah, you can go.
Yeah. I think that's the main challenge of memoir writing is you're representing real people, and they don't have a right of reply as such. So I think I felt very much a very strong obligation, you know, is this the truth as far as I understand it? Is this fair? And is this necessary for the story? Because in my experience, I had a slightly different experience to Adam, in that when I was writing, when I had a little sister, the book about my sister's death, my mother didn't come across very well. And that surprised me. I didn't realize that that's what was going to happen. I didn't realize, I thought I was writing a book about my little sister. Then I realized I was writing a book about my mother. Then I realized I was actually writing a book about myself. And I once asked a very well-known memoirist, how did you go about writing about your mother and your sister? And she said, I waited till they were dead. And I feel that there's no way that I could have published that book if my mother had been alive. But I didn't realize that when I started writing it. I mean, I tried to give a fair and, I mean, I wrote it with love. I didn't write it with anger. I didn't write it with any kind of revenge or anything like that in mind. I wrote it with love, and I hope that it's a fair representation. But at the end of the day, it's not terribly flattering in some instances. But people have come to me, members of the family have come to me and said, oh yes, your mother was just like that, wasn't she? In a way that would never have been said, you know, if she was alive. So I couldn't have written that if my mother had been alive.
Really?
I hear that from a lot of people, that sort of fear of messing with people and treating them like characters and misrepresenting them, or accurately representing them. And that's the real challenge. I know with mine, one of the best bits of feedback I got was from my sister, who said, I thought I was invisible and you saw me. And I think to have made someone feel that way is it's kind of incredible, really. It was worth the risk of writing about real people, because it could go horribly wrong. You could upset someone.
Yeah, I had the exact opposite experience, in that I was very aware, you know, I'm putting my family in a book. I haven't asked their permission, although I did run certain bits by them and so on. But afterwards, I was told by one of my main characters, there's not enough me in it. They said to me, it was my sister. She said, there's not enough me in it.
Yeah.
And she even went through the book and counted how many photographs. So you worry that people don't want to be written about, but in actual fact, people do want their lives acknowledged. I was playing it safe and trying to, you know, be diplomatic, say, but actually people want to have their lives acknowledged. You know, and I hadn't foreseen that problem at all.
No, that's a really interesting one, isn't it? Catherine, I think we're going to hear a little bit from When I Had a Little Sister, if you happy to read now.
Yeah, just get my phone going here. Right. Okay. So, so again, this is from chapter 4 of When I Had a Little Sister, and it's again just to show the juxtaposition of humour and pathos. And I also think again this is quite a northern farming thing. So. Every wall, so this is the day after my sister died, and I'm walking from my dad's house down to the farmhouse where she died, which is the same house where I was born. Every wall, every gateway, and every tree on the lane leading to the farmhouse held a memory of Tricia. On my right was the wooden fence we leaned on to watch the mating ducks when she was 5 or 6. "What they doing?" she asked. "Making friends," I said. On my left was the verge where our neighbour parked his flatbed truck. Our stage for the plays I wrote, heavily influenced by Enid Blyton, in which I cast Tricia and Janet from next door mainly as dolls or fairies. Past the verge was the high yard wall we balanced along for playing ballet, never having had a ballet lesson. We took turns wearing a dog-eared 1950s evening dress donated to the dressing up box by great Auntie Margaret, and we did twizzers, arms outstretched and on tiptoes, until we legged ourselves up. At right angles was the stone garden wall we used as a stage to play Miss World, during which we draped ourselves in stuff from Mum's rag bag. Elizabeth was compere and held a spoon or a drumstick for a microphone. And in national dress, please welcome Miss Guam, as I set off down the wall wearing a 1940s tea dress tied round with a tablecloth. Next up in her evening frock, it's Miss Ceylon, and Tricia tottered down the wall wearing a vest with a 1920s shawl around her waist and bits of broken chain belt in her hair. On one occasion, we used the wall as a catwalk for a fashion show with dresses we made from old cow feed sacks, with holes cut for heads and arms and tied up with bale twine. The sacks made a mini for Elizabeth, a midi for me, and a maxi for Tricia, and left us covered in hundreds of tiny insect bites. We sampled the cow food pellets, finding them salty and gloopy when chewed, but tried to forget about that 15 years later when mad cow disease was all over the papers. The day after Tricia died, I was drawn down the lane from Dad's to the farmhouse by a sense of disbelief, I think, a sense heightened by the many surrounding memories. The mortuary was closed for the weekend, so I had not yet visited her body, and I needed evidence it had happened, to see Tricia's world without her in it, to check she was really gone. Inside, the house smelled of stale tobacco, a smell that hit me then like a punch and still does. To me, the smell of stale tobacco is the smell of anguish and hopelessness. I stood at the door of the bathroom with its cold coffee and cigarettes on the wooden floor by the radiator. I moved about the house where I was born, a place that since yesterday had become the place Tricia had chosen to die.
Okay, thank you, Catherine. I'm going to, I think it's a good point to bring in some of the audience questions now. I'm not sure can you guys see them?
Yeah.
No.
I'll read them out. So we have a really brilliant question here from Sarah Hunt. So do either of you wish you had said something that you chose to withhold when you were writing your book? Or is there anything you feel you wish you hadn't revealed?
There's certainly nothing that I've revealed that I've regretted, not at all. One or two things people did ask me to take out for taste reasons, and I refused. And I'm really glad that I refused. I won't say which bits because it was my husband and he wasn't very happy that I didn't take it out. But I didn't take it out, and I'm glad, because the whole point of memoir is truthfulness. And do I wish I'd said things? The only thing that I regret, I had a mentor, and I quoted my mother as saying umpteen times. She said umpteen. She was always using the word umpteen. And this mentor, who was actually Bulgarian, so she wasn't from Lancashire, but she said, "Oh, that's a cliche. Why is she using that word? Take that out." And I took it out, and I thought afterwards, why on earth did I take that out? That's exactly what my mother said all the time. So other than that, no.
Okay. Adam.
Yeah, I can't think that there's. I think I packed so much of my life into this. I don't think there was anything that I wish I'd. Yeah, I'm trying to think. No, I don't. There's nothing that I feel was left unsaid, or anything that I feel like should have packed in there, really.
Would you hold?
But I'm not squeamish about any of that. I imagine it's the same with Catherine. I don't feel that either of us will tiptoe around subjects or hold back too much in the name of sensitivity. If there's a need to say a certain thing, then it will be in there.
I mean, there are things in my book that I'd never told anyone before, and well, except my husband knew, but I hadn't told my children, for instance. So, and I said to my husband, I'm going to write about, I'm going to write about whatever the abortion. It was an abortion, actually, and I said, I'm going to write about that. And he said, that's fine, it's your story, but you need to tell the children first, because I have 2 grown-up daughters. And so I told them, and they just said, it's your story, you tell it. And I thought that was really great of them to acknowledge that. And there were other things that I include in the book that I've never written before. But I do find that once you put it on the page, it suddenly stops being shameful. And that is one of the main reasons that people have enjoyed reading it, and why I enjoyed writing this book, is that it just says, I'm not going to be ashamed anymore. I'm not going to be ashamed because I live in this body. I'm not going to be ashamed about all the things that comes with a female body, which women are brought up to feel ashamed about, all kinds of periods and menopause and all kinds of things that women have shame about. And I'm just not having it anymore. And I'm, it's my book, it's my voice. I'm going to tell my story, and actually nobody. And I'm really glad that my daughters kind of were happy about that, because I'm not sure what would have happened if they weren't.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for those answers. A question from Catherine Tan. Adam, can you see this one? Adam mentioned that he never expected the book to be as much about him as it was. So how do you reassure yourself when that feeling became a bit daunting?
Yeah, I think it was made easier for me because I had a mentor who was working with me while I was writing this. So that sense of, yeah, why would anyone care about me? I obviously consider myself interesting enough to write about, but you do wonder if you've got an audience, and why anyone should be paying any attention. But showing these stories to Jen Ashworth, she's like, this is really funny, or this is a thing that no one talks about. Like there's lots of discussion of being a teenage boy and trying to prepare an identity and find your place in the world, and that sort of self-analysis. And she was like, well, but I've not read anyone talking about this in this way. And that kind of thing validated it for me. It's like, okay, well, I've got this person who I was paying her through Arts Council funding to tell me the truth and to like keep me in line. So those kind of things really helped brush aside that doubt. But it was always there. I think even until it went out into the world and people started reading it, it was like, God, is anyone going to read it? Because why should they? But luckily they are, and that's a massive relief.
But there were definitely sorry.
So can I just say I had exactly the opposite experience, in that I was writing a book about my sister, and I think I was frightened of butting in myself. And I had a mentor too, and she said to me, yes, this is all very well, but the reader wants to know who's telling them this story. You've cut yourself out of your own story. So I had to go back and rewrite myself into my own story, because I think I was thinking it was a respectful thing to do, because I was writing about my sister's death or something, and I didn't want to get the limelight or something. But my mentor saying, this is not as interesting as it could be. We want to know your opinion of things. We want to know who you are, who's telling us this story. So so my mentor was equally useful to me.
Yeah, I think there's a big discussion we could have about the benefits of your mentors, actually, if we had time. So there's another question here from Julie Carter, who feels the novel is an outdated form, given how good modern life writing is becoming, but there's still lots of novels published, and what thoughts you have on that. It's a big question, but we don't have that much time, but just quick answers, if that's okay.
Well, can I just say that I'm absolutely obsessed with memoir at the moment. I'm obsessed with writing it. I'm obsessed with reading it. And if I pick something up and I think, oh, that looks good, and I find out it's a novel, I actually put it back down and go and look for a memoir. That's just the way that I'm feeling at the moment, that there's this kind of direct contact with the writer that I really enjoy having. I wouldn't ever say that the novel is an outdated form, because I couldn't justify that, I suppose. But at the moment, I'm very much into, and there's some amazing life writing about, and I'm very much into reading it.
Is there one you'd recommend at the moment?
Oh gosh, I'm reading Helen Garner. I've just read a Helen Garner one. I'm just reading this one about she's a name I can't even pronounce, Alexandra Marzano-Lesenovich. And again, people do write, they're writing their own stories, but they're interweaving them with societal things and other people's stories. So interesting. So yeah,
the growth of that form has been really wonderful to see over the last few years. So many different people are approaching that form from different angles, and it's really exciting for someone who loves it like you do.
There's an endless way to keep using your life story, or to investigate all the bits of your own story by linking it with other things.
Yeah,
well, my one I'd recommend very quickly is this is from a book from the 90s, but I think it really sets a standard in creative nonfiction and life writing. It's called The Boys of My Youth by Joanne Beard. And I recommend that to everyone, because it's such an incredible collection of essays looking deeply at her life and experiences. And yeah, I think about that all the time when I'm writing. It's like, if I can just get a bit of how good that book is.
Yeah, same with me. I think it was the first time I did some life reading, Once in a House on Fire by Andrea Ashworth. And I just thought, oh my, that is just such an amazing book.
Yeah. There's a related question here from Joe about your understanding of the essay, what the relationship between essay and memoir, why it's essays rather than chapters. And I guess, Adam, that's maybe one for you to answer.
Yeah, I mean, essays, I suppose, they're a self-contained thing that you've got a particular point that you're making, and a particular resolution that you're reaching, and that makes them easier, I suppose. That's why it was I didn't realize I was writing a memoir when I was writing it, because I had these ideas of standalone different topics that I'd be addressing. Like I had there was the essay that deals with suicide. That was my original thought. And then pretty much every essay has actually got a thread running through it, because they ended up naturally connecting, partly because of the environment that I was writing about. But yeah, really, I think it is that it's essays over chapters because of that self-contained nature. So all the essays in this book can be broadly read standalone, but they're so much stronger as part of that memoir.
I think that's the distinction, yeah, which makes a really interestingly constructed book, standalone essays that also have something in their wider construction that links them together. Pamela, thank you for your question. I think you asked that before we had our discussion about writing about family members, and I hope we managed to answer that one for you. And then Mick is asking about using dialect sparingly in your books. Catherine, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I use Lancashire words like mithering, and I use whatever words people would have used themselves if I'm using bits of dialogue. And I think rather than dialect, I think I use a sort of an intonation. There's a certain downbeat. Well, I was once told that I wrote lyrical downbeat. And I think that's a really nice way of thinking about it. There is a certain Lancashire directness, a certain no frills way of speaking, which I do try and write in that way. And I think sometimes people misunderstand that. And I was once told when my first book came out, oh, it's very simple writing, which is not bad for a first book, without realizing that actually writing simply is harder than writing, because it takes so much editing to get it right down to the tone that I'm trying to go for, which is this lyrical deadpan. I use the occasional, stop mithering and so on.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. We're actually quite running out of time. So Adam, we were hoping that you could sort of close things off with a reading from Cold Fish Soup.
Yeah. So I'm going to read from the essay that deals with my brother's suicide. This is the last time that I saw him. The last time I saw Robert, I was visiting his house during a trip home around Christmas. It was a dozen or so years after he'd moved to Withensea, and he was married by then, with 6 children all crammed into his 3-bedroom house. There was nowhere in his home that you could rest your gaze without seeing a broken, candy-coloured toy, or a child bearing a chocolate smear smile. And in the middle of it all sat Robert, gently swivelling in an office chair beside his computer, engulfed by a fog of cigarette smoke, and looking as if he'd just returned from an hour spent extricating himself from an electric fence. His eyes were wide and raw, staring out from a pale, pillowy head. His hair stood wildly on end. Something crucial was missing from his face. "What happened to your eyebrows?" I asked, speaking, I realized, to his forehead. He lifted his hand to the void where his eyebrows had once been and absently rubbed the skin. "Scratched them off," he said casually, then smiled. His face crumpled into a sudden chaos of lines. It easily aged him by 20 years. Like a bad wig, once you've noticed that someone has no eyebrows, you can concentrate on little else. So I said the first thing that occurred to me. "I guess you could draw some on." He smiled weakly and playfully told me to fuck off, and then turned to his computer and began pecking at his keyboard. It was a disappointing reaction. Had I spoken to Robert like that during in his peak during the late 80s, he'd have pounced on me and drawn a set of angry eyebrows on my face with a jumbo marker, and maybe a Hitler moustache. He wasn't one to let things slide. He'd always been a man of high emotion, had lived and reacted big, and I had learnt from him. His examples and behaviour had shown me what to do and what not to do. They revealed the mysteries of the world. He taught me how much alcohol is too much, what a clitoris was and where, how to gut a fish with a saw-backed hunting knife and why I would never want to. I learned about music, drugs, fear, and pain, that I don't like horror films, that I like pro wrestling, that farts are funny if you like them, and funnier still when they set fire to your trousers, that older brothers' bedrooms contain magazines featuring naked women that will flip a switch in your midsection that can never be turned off. He showed me what it was like to be held down and farted upon, to be punched, to have an axe thrown at me twice during a camping trip that we never spoke of again, how to swear, to shoot an air gun, to play Smoke on the Water on the guitar, and eventually what it was like to love your brother harder than he knew and have him become a stranger. If I had known at that point that he'd already tried to kill himself a number of times, that he'd had the same thoughts in Withensea as me, we might have had a more significant conversation. Had I been told of the night that he'd staggered into the sea and tried to drown himself, or of the time he'd overdosed and woken up cursing that he was still alive, I'm sure we would have said more. I'd have at least tried to find out what drove him to scratch off his eyebrows. But looking at his living room, the chaos of it, I guessed at stress rather than suicidal ideation. So I just made small talk about the weather and his dust-caked shelf of Iron Maiden collectibles, then drove back to Manchester. My job done, my brother successfully visited. A box ticked. Done.
Well, thanks so much for reading that piece, which is enormously evocative and powerful and beautifully written. And the line that runs through that section of the book is encapsulates so much of what's in there in terms of the sibling relationships and the sense of what it is to grow up with someone and that huge sense of loss as well. I'm so grateful to both of you for being with us tonight and for talking through everything, and to the audience too. Thank you for so many excellent, insightful questions as well that really got us all thinking. It's really good of you, and also thanks again to the Portico for having us tonight. It's good to see you both, Adam and Catherine.
Yeah, it's been loads of fun. I've really enjoyed this. Thank you.
Yeah, lovely. I mean, I think we could have talked for another couple of hours. I think actually there's so much to discuss. But I'm going to hand back, I think, to David Cooper now. I think is out there. Hi, David.
Hi, everyone. Wow. Yeah, I just want to echo thanks. That reading was absolutely wonderful. And as an academic, I've made sort of copious amounts of notes. There's just so many great lines and so many. I just wanted to, if you just indulge me for a second, I just wanted to say two things which really stuck with me. Adam, when you said that your sister said that she thought she was invisible, but she was seen through the act of writing, I thought that was incredible. And then Catherine, similarly, once you put it down on the page, it stops being shameful. Again, I thought it was just such a wonderful line. So yeah, and thought it was really moving. So yeah, thank you both very much. So it's just my job at the end to thank both Adam and Catherine. Also, I really want to thank Will for chairing that event so expertly, and the discussion, which was fantastic. And like Will said, I also want to thank all the members of the audience for logging in this evening. The next Rewriting the North event is on for Thursday, the 13th of October, and we'll be covering similar topics. There'll be two memoir writers, Tamitha Lastly and Jeff Young, who will be talking about their respective writings. And yeah, that'll be Thursday, the 13th of October. So please, if you're available, please do log in for that. The other thing I've been told to remind you is that at the end, when this event ends, we press end event and we all get unceremoniously dumped out of this space, and it's all a bit abrupt. So apologies for the abruptness of that, but that's the way that these things work. So yeah, all that remains for me to say is thank you all very much, and I hope that you all have really good evenings. Thanks again. Bye, everyone.